people, and we are welcoming today Stephen Poplin. He's a very good friend of Nadia. We were talking about how he met Nadia. And so, yeah, let's welcome him. And how do you feel, Stephen? Stephen, how are you doing?
Well, it's really great to be here. I love astrology. I've been involved with astrological studies for many, many years. And I think it's also quite an interesting time here that transiting Venus is exactly conjuncting my Mercury today. And so I hope to be charming and informative.
Thank you.
Okay. And now we can make it official. Little station identification there. Okay, good. So my focus here is the fine tuning of the birth chart. And we're looking at the um, the time that is typically given to us, and then having opportunities to make sure that that chart is indeed correct. And we can look back into, ancient times, into the Chaldean times, the ancient Egyptians, also the Hindus, many different cultures having their uh, prognostications, but that it all starts with making those proper calculations. And this wonderful image here from 1533, all the different ways that stargazers would make their adjustments, their calculations, because we really do need an accurate chart. And we're talking about, of course, the time of birth. But let me ask, persevere. So we're aiming towards accuracy. And of course, the famous Lois Rawdon in the 1970s, she really insisted upon a proper authentication of where did we get the information, what sources, data, and the best, of course, would be a birth certificate. But even with the birth certificate, is that correct? Was it written down on the forms after some other emergency or later on? And even if the birth certificate says a nice rounded off, like a 1 o'clock, or even what we would think is, oh, probably very true, 107, 102, 213, you go, oh, that sounds very accurate. But maybe the clock was wrong. So that's why we're here. So if one doesn't know that there is a general time, we are going to be doing the calculations based on the chart that you have and the information that you have. And I believe that individual life begins with the first breath. And wouldn't it be great if we had in every birth, all of the doulas out there witnessing birth, not only, paying attention to an accurate clock, but when does that child take its first breath? And when did that happen? So I am giving a fine-tuning method here for rectification, and that means you are given a particular time. And so if it's, and I talk about these two different ways of starting the process. One, someone comes to you as an astrologer and says, oh, I think it was in the morning, or I believe it was Tuesday. And I go, oh my goodness, that is so vague. That is definitely a form of rectification, but this today, we're going to be having a time given, even if it's on your birth certificate. As I said, well, I'm still, suspicious about that. So it could be like within an hour or two, and then we can still use this because it's a fine tuning process. And we begin here with the table of houses. And that's how I got started back in the day. And I even have the book with me here today that that is where I got all of the initial information and where my theory and process came from. It's from looking through the tables. And here, for instance, is an example of just like one particular page. These are the Koch table of houses. And by the way, the ascendant and the midheaven for Koch and Placidus is the same. It's just the other houses, the succeedant and the cadent houses are different. Okay, so just to like really pay attention, and I hope you can see my cursor here. Can you see my cursor above the Coke?
Yeah, but I think it's too little.
Okay, very, very good. So here's just an example of one of the houses here, and the sidereal time here on the left-hand side. Here is the exact degree and minutes. This one here happens to be Gemini, and all of the tables, are going to be looking like that. And now a close-up of this, and the sidereal time, as you can see over here, it is 5:24, and that is equal then to the 21 Gemini. And just notice here, as we go from table to table to table, that approximately there are 4 minutes difference. Here is 5:24, here's 5:28, here's 5:32, 4 minutes each table. And that is what we're going to be starting with here, because that is approximately here we go back to 21 Gemini, 22, 23. You can also see that it's not exactly correct, with the 4 degrees, which is why later on, when you have the higher numbers, like age 20, age 30, age 40, okay, it's not going to be exactly 1 degree per year, but that's what we're going to be building on. It'll come clear later. Maybe you already know a lot of this. So we are seeking patterns, and some of those patterns are quite obvious, classically ascendants, conjuncting or opposing a particular thing. But maybe there is a semi-sextile or a sesquiquadrate. Um, some things are not so obvious, but they all point towards these patterns. And this is a wonderful picture I use, by the way, believing that the soul here is the round water bubble being born, coming into the earth and making its impression. And then the waves of time space is moved because of our presence, because of our incarnation here into the earth, into the body. I have passed on to Aida as well as Nadia here my PDF informational pages, and one of them is going to be describing what I send off to people who are interested in having their chart rectified. And so that's a PDF that you all have. Also, there I've got descriptions of aspects, signs, and other helpful information that's already given to Synchronicity University. You can get that. But starting off with here, the first number one part of this question, this is what I give out to all of my interested parties, describes like what I had verbally already told you. Okay, a general kind of thing, born in the afternoon, whereas this process, which is now number two, that's when you have something more specific. And that's where we're going to be starting on. And this is the information that I give to people. And I would like to, in aiding you to do this very same thing, asking your people who are interested in them to write down some notes for these sessions. Could be a Zoom session like we're having now, or a telephone, or really quite nice in person. And then a short sketch of events and times in that life, a mini autobiography, as it were. and includes descriptions of events and significant emotional experiences chronologically. And then just as they're starting to have a panic attack, I tell them that no, this is not a big deal. 10 items should do. We don't need you to write a biography. And and then for you as the astrologers, unless your client is very versed in astrology, this is just insider information for you all, and that the list that our people will write up or will discuss in a verbal exchange, not everything will show up with this particular technique. Be- so it might be like a transit from Saturn or a uh, the moon's nodes, on an eclipse path. So that will not show up with this. And that means that certain, maybe even some major events in people's lives, you know, we as the rectifiers, as the astrologers, fine tuning this chart, we may not discuss. And they say, well, why, that was such an important event in my life. It should show up there. Yes, it probably will, but not through this particular technique. Now, in the same request that I give to my potentials, this is just an example. And although this is given to them and they can just give them some ideas about what to write and the extra details to give us for astrologers with our inside knowledge, let's read some of these different things right here. For instance, here we have, 1971, my sister was born. And then I want to have them to note the feelings. Okay. And we as astrologers will say, okay, when that sister was born, was that like an opposition? Was that a square? Because I was jealous of her. Okay. So we're looking also for, certain aspects, not just that there's a child born. Here we have this other. There was a bicycle accident and stitches on my head. And then we astrologers will say, the head. Oh, that could be Mars. That could be Aries. Then here we have a crush on your classmate. And I began playing piano. Doesn't that sound Venusian? Yes. And but then I asked, did you think of it as a joy or was it a chore when you were playing the piano? Because that certainly does happen. And that again will point us towards, oh, was that a semi-square to Venus? As compared with a sextile, which is very positive. So various things, that's what we're already cooking with as they start to tell us things, as they collect this information. Here, they got a puppy here for a birthday gift. Wow. And I'm wondering then, as an astrologer, what's happening in the sixth house? Or maybe with some of the asteroids, it could show up also in the fourth house thing, something, a little love coming into your home. Then here we've got, a grandmother died here, but I didn't know her well. Okay. So it may not even show up with this particular method, or it might be a rather minor aspect. And so that's what we're looking at here. Again, over here, 1982, summer, moved to the country. Wow, that could be Jupiter. Okay. And then how did they feel about it? Okay, felt isolated. Oh, could that be a square to Jupiter? So that's what we're looking for when we are paying attention to these things. Then we hear 1988, met my future husband. Okay, very good. Now, I imagine that could be the fifth house or definitely the seventh house somehow is aspected. So that's what we're starting off with. And here is our first story. Okay. And this is a female, and I have named it A Story of Twos, Love and Lust. And we pay attention, first of all, to this potential rising sign, Gemini, because I'm given a time of 11:30, but remember, I don't know if that is true. Okay, but that's where we have to start. I was given this time of 11:30. We do the calculations for that. And now we're paying attention in this methodology to the angular house right here, the first house, and also the opposite is an angular house here too, in the seventh. Then the succeedent house, and then the cadent house comes up next. And then again, we begin with the angular houses. And with this particular method, those angular houses, that's where I start with, because that's where things are going to be a conjunction or an opposition. Okay. And we start up here with this methodology. The 10th house, 9 degrees Aquarius shows up here. And remember when we were looking at the table of houses, it's like 1 degree per year, approximately. Okay. So then there's nothing up here, although you'll see that here at 13 degrees, I do have no, excuse me, at 4 degrees, I've got the Earth position, and I put in the Earth exactly, always exactly opposite the sun. That's going to show up a bit later. It has to go actually all the way through Aquarius and then enter into the next sign of Pisces in order to make that conjunction and then an opposition to the sun down here. Okay, well, we're going to be paying attention to that. That's going to be probably significant. We're looking also here at the progressed ascendant. It does not move 1 degree per year. It's got its own thing. That's why we have the houses, or in our modern case, that's the calculations that we make with our computer programs. But what we are looking at is, okay, as that ascendant continues to move in life, it's going to be making a conjunction with the North Node. We'll find that out with the calculations when that happened. Then it's going to be making a conjunction to the planet Uranus. That is probably going to be significant. So again, back up here to the midheaven, down here, as it moves, tick tock, 1 degree per year. Okay, look at this. We've got a Pluto opposition, followed by Mercury opposition, and then here is the sun. Those are going to be significant. Those are going to be the first ones I look at, the real obvious conjunctions, oppositions, maybe squares, but that's where we start. Then we do, of course, the calculation. How do we find out about that? Especially with the progressed ascendant that moves a bit different in time. So I use the Solar Fire program, and you may be using several others. There's quite a few good programs, but I've been using this one here for years. And so then I created a saved selection, and Solar Fire is very good about this. You can look at, transits, progressions, solar arcs, whatever you want to do, and you give the parameters, and then you give it a name. And I gave this one here, Rectify, and that's the name of this set of calculations. And then I always have to say it has to be the natal, not the relocated placement. It has to be natal for this progression to work. And then here you notice that there's no transits to the radix, transits to transits. It's only the progressions to the radix, and only, and this is the set that I created, the ascendant and midheaven. Only that's what we're looking at, the progressed ascendant and midheaven. That's it. Put in your list of planets that you would like to pay attention to, and then your aspect sets. And we'll talk about aspects in a minute. But very important, choose your parameters and so forth, and always go towards the natal position. I have a starting date, typically a couple of days after the person is born, and that's, not the, it could be a week, could be 10 days, could be, but just, a couple days after they're born, that's when I started. And then how a period of time, how many years, and here's to a simple 31 years. Okay. And that's where we get started. Now, there's another important part of the solar fire program, and that is which method of progression. And again, looking at just the midheaven and the ascendant, which method do we use? And then here's a drop-down list, coming from the preferences section. Here is the solar arc and longitude, solar arc and right ascension, Nibod longitude. Nibod in right ascension is what I have used. And the reason why I use that, and by the way, that's the only choice on this particular option of preferences that you need to pay attention to. You don't have to look at the rest of it, just that, Nibod in right ascension. And the reason why I use that particular one is because it matches the book of tables. I don't even have to understand why they're using the word Nibod. Then, as I said, there's a set of aspects, and you'll find these quite interesting, especially in your own charts and people that you're working with. And the sextiles, squares, oppositions, and so forth. We probably can have a good educated guess about what's going to happen with them. But the two kind of smaller ones might be quite interesting in this respect. And the semi-sextile, which is just 30 degrees, I have seen that show up when someone comes upon something brand new. I haven't done that before. It's a new hobby. I haven't been introduced to it or him or her yet. It's brand new, something different in my life. That is when a semi-sextile shows up. Then also very interesting is the quincunx. That's 150 degrees, I think. And that is uh, a, something that's not quite connected. It is something that's off. It could be like one person's in agreement, the other person is not in agreement. I call it the odd couple aspect, where someone is living together and one's a slob and one is a neat neck. It's like, why are they even living together? They're so different. But that's what shows up with the quincunx aspect. And then once we have all these particular things with that initial chart that I had pointed out, this is what you get. This is the calculations that you get. And remember, when we were looking at that chart, we were paying attention to, for instance, when the midheaven went to the Pluto, and then it went to the moon. Okay, that would be that opposition. So where does that show up here when we put in these calculations? And here is the midheaven here at making an opposition to Mercury. And the nice thing about this is that it gives us a particular date, a date and a year. And by the way, since this is kind of a year equals 4 minutes difference. I never pay attention to, December 18th or March 17th. That's too exact. This is kind of it was in the spring, you know, that's how you're thinking about. Oh, not the exact day, but oh, it happened in the autumn. Okay. But here it lists the exact date and year. And what's also very handy is it gives us the age. And here's a column of the age when these various things happen. Because when you're talking with people, they'll say, oh, yeah, well, that happened in 2004. I know that. Okay. And how old were you? How old was I? Okay. So this is for people who, oh, I knew I was 12 years old and when that happened and I went off to camp, I know that 12 years. That was what a year that was. And other people is like, oh yeah, that was 1992. Yeah. So some people remember dates, some people remember ages. but we've got both of them here with this that we can kind of work with that. Now I'm going to go right down here, just to start off the process to look for those really big and obvious things. Like I said, conjunctions, oppositions, I had mentioned up here this Mercury, that shows up now at age 9. You see that? And then let's jump down here to oh yeah, look at that. When here is a trine to Jupiter followed by a conjunction to the planet Uranus, and that shows up at 16. Okay, so that's where we get started, these particular dates. Then we get into the actual discussion. Okay, is that true? And remember, I was talking about that Mercury, that midheaven making that opposition to Mercury. I said, oh yeah, that happened at 9 in my calculations. So we start talking about it. And then I have to, as the astrologer, as the instigator, I have to say, okay, Mercury, that is oftentimes associated with communications, education, maybe starting a particular school. Sometimes it's a move and but stimulation for the mind. Mercury loves that sort of thing. Did that happen at 9? That's what the calculations say. They say no, that did not happen at 9, but it happened at 7. Okay. Oh, well, how about, okay, that's interesting. Well, how about that other thing here where we've got that trine to the planet Uranus? And that was, in my calculations, that showed up at 12. They says, nope, that didn't happen at 12. That was arts and crafts. And by the way, 4-H, Uranus, groups, subgroups, ethnic groups, clubs, associations. They were into the 4-H in these younger years, and they got into crafts, got into cooking, and they had a speech problem prior to that point. And through some very clever group help and a therapist's help, they overcame the speech problem. Well, that's a trine to the planet Uranus in Gemini. Smoother communications. How great. That did not happen at 12. It happened at 10. Okay, and that's what we're really getting at. All of these, aspects are really interesting. This is a great way to learn astrology, by the way, and how planets show up in one's life. But with this particular thing, we have already figured out that, oh, I am consistently up here. That happened at 7. No, it didn't. It happened at 5. Oh, this happened at 9. No, it didn't. It happened at 7. So we're consistently 2 years off. You see that? And so the calculations that I made already, they're 2 years off. And it's actually happened before. We have to subtract time, or years. We are subtracting years. And that means when you subtract years, you add times. You add every year 4 minutes. So we're starting off now with 8 minutes that we're adding in order to make it match with the actual events in this person's life. Okay. So making these calculations, remember, we had these particular things that, remember here we had that trine to Uranus, and that showed up here. We've got the year, but they weren't talking about years. They were talking about um, years, not dates. So it showed up in that calculation again, just comparing what happened, and we found that it was 2 years off. And that shows it did not happen at 12, it happened at 10. That's why we're talking about making these time adjustments, and that's the formula. I do make that, and then through several other discussions, it was, yes, 8 minutes off, but actually just to fine tune it with some later aspects and events in this person's life. Okay, it was actually 9 minutes. So the rectified time is 11:39, not the 11:30 that was given to me. And now this chart with 11:39, it will fit. And so again, just to check that trine to the planet Uranus, it shows up here at 10. as they said, that's when that happened at age 10. And this, uh, uh, we take a look here, for instance, again, just to double check. Here's the ascendant making a square to the moon. That's probably going to be important. The moon in the fourth house, and that happened at 13. Okay, that's good. Let's compare that with the actual events. Square moon, age 13. But then we'll add over here, here is a conjunction with that Uranus. That's age 14. Conjunction Uranus. Back to that same list of things that I had shown before. Here is the square to the moon. It also happens to be a trine to Venus, but here is that ascendant square moon. What happened there? Her sister didn't like her, but she had a new girlfriend because we got that trine to Venus. And there was a move. I find that so often with a strong aspect to the moon, and this moon is in the fourth house. There was a move. They went to another place. Then she got into the flute and art there. But that's back to the trine to Venus. Okay, it's all working out just perfectly. Then, like a half a year later, we've got this midheaven trining Jupiter. Oh, then they took this trip to Canada, and she really loved it up there. It was such a wonderful place to go to. How about that? A trine to Jupiter. Okay. And then here was now a conjunction to the planet Uranus, a conjunction in your first house to the planet Uranus. So she was a silent rebel. She petitioned students against the school system, and she was helping the underdog, and she was called into the office often. I mean, is that, ascendant conjunct Uranus? And so it's really quite perfect. And that is really interesting, again, to learn about these particular aspects and how they would show up in someone's chart, but also that now we know with that time change, that adjustment, it is fitting perfectly and the chart is working and it's rectified. But that's not all. Here's some bonus information because there were some specific things that happened that is going to give us some more information that we are learning as we are doing these rectifications. Now, what she did, and this is part of, this is the woman with the twos, and she's got this Gemini rising. So, the things can happen in twos. She has two daughters. She was married twice. She has one sister, she and her sister, as part of a duet. Okay, so the twos really show up a lot, but that's just kind of a side note, something that we learn in just looking at one's chart. What she told me over here, she says, oh yeah, here's the divorce right here. And then she was married 1 year later. Okay. And she verbally told me, oh yeah, I think I was just about 28, so I wrote down, 27.9. I was almost 28, but then the date and the age does not match because she says, "Oh, I was almost, 28, but I know the exact time when I got my divorce. That was the 2nd of August, 1978." That's when, because that's a significant date in her life. 1 year later, also in August 1979, she says, "Oh, I married this new fellow," and she started seeing him before she got her divorce. So we're going to be paying attention to that too. But what this also tells me is, you know, she gave me two different pieces of information. One was incorrect with her faulty memory of how old she was, but the date she knows that is on a certificate. That is a piece of paper. So sometimes as astrologers, sometimes doing this work, yeah, where did you get the information? And it needs to be correct. But let's take a look at this. Here we have a divorce in 1978. Okay, not the age she told me. And here's a list down here of the ages. We're going to ignore that, but the year is 1978. And what we have here, remembering that not everything shows up with these aspects, because it could be a transit, of Saturn or planet Uranus, who knows? But in 78, we know that the marriage was dissolving and she was heading towards a divorce. And here we have the ascendant squaring the planet Neptune. Isn't that true? And then she told me, and I don't know exactly when, but she says she started seeing this new guy before she got a divorce. And so it could be any of these aspects above. I don't know how long she was seeing this other fellow, but something very suspicious here is that, prior to Neptune, of course, a square to Neptune in the fifth house, starting a new relationship, dissolving the other one, that's not exactly a very stable dynamic. And then just prior to that, we've got a quincunx to Pluto in the fourth, and then also a quincunx to Mars, again in the fifth house of love affairs. Okay. And again, I don't know when she started it, but any of these aspects just prior to the divorce would say, don't get into another relationship. These are not great aspects, but she did what she did, right? She got into that relationship. This was marriage number two, and she found out some years later, and that's what we show over here. At age 42, she found out that this second husband had been incesting her daughters, and he got one of them pregnant. I mean, was this a catastrophe? And on some level, wasn't she paying attention what was going on in her home? What we do see, back to some of these, initial aspects as she was meeting this guy, starting that these are very, I don't want to say unconscious aspects. They're very difficult aspects for a new relationship. And then remember, it was at 42 that she found this out. I've got these aspects over here at 41.9 age, and that is here when she really found out and came to that conclusion. It is a quincunx to Jupiter in the fifth. And the fifth house, of course, is the house of children. And she was shocked what had happened to her children. She discovered Jupiter, giving information of this quincunx. This should not be happening, you know. So what a catastrophe that was prior to that. And it could be any of these aspects prior to her consciously knowing what was happening in her own family. That could say, well, there's some difficult aspects there. Things were definitely happening, but you weren't paying that much attention. So here we have her rectified chart, and still it's got that Gemini rising. And I want to point out a couple of interesting things, not only for rectification, but in general understanding of patterns in astrology and interpretations. Libra intercepted in the fifth house, and she got therapy for herself and for her daughters. And when you think of therapy, here is Libra in the fifth house of children. And pay attention here that intercepted, the whole sign of Libra is intercepted in the fifth house of her children, and she did not know what was happening with her girls. And a very, very sad, very intense dynamic there. Uh, the aspect, we take a look here, the incest, Saturn transiting, Saturn and Uranus was transiting here in the seventh house. It was transiting opposing Uranus when she discovered. Again, that you're not going to find that out from the progression method that I'm sharing with you. It was just such a shocking thing that I, wanted to find out what was happening with the transits. And again, it was Saturn, Uranus in the seventh house of relationships of her marriage opposing here Uranus, and then again, the two shows up here in Gemini. What a shock. And having to get then group therapy, Uranus group therapy, to kind of like deal with that. And you might remember that her sister, when they were young, didn't like her, or they had some issues. But after that second divorce, she bought a home with her sister. And here is the third house of siblings. And here is a practical Saturn placement. And so she got into real estate with her sister. If you have any questions about any of this, go ahead and pass them on to the chat, and Aida will pass them on to me. Okay, so that was just a very, interesting and intense example, but let's take a look at the interviewing process because, you know, all of those dates and times and events that just came forth in the discussion. What I had to begin with was an aspect to the planet Uranus, a square to the moon, and then I have to prime that and ask these questions. And one thing that people have asked, they say, okay, I've got the information. Here is like a list of 10 or 20 different things that happened to me. I send it to you in an email. Do those calculations. And by the way, that as an astrologers, that gives us plenty of time to compare. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, I have to subtract here. I have to add here. We have plenty of time on our own to do that, and then we give them, ta-da, their birth time. The downside of that is that there's a kind of a letdown. They say, I gave you all of this information, this intimate information about myself, and the only thing you can give me now is I was born at 107. Okay, well, how interesting that is. But when there is an actual exchange, and that's how it usually happens with me, we have a phone or a Zoom consultation, and then we go back and forth and say, oh, this happened at age of 13. Is that true? Not quite true. That was 1 year later. Okay, then we make those adjustments, and then after that, it goes, oh, I keep on adding the 1 year, and then it turns into a great conversation. I learn more about astrology and aspects and planet, and then they are saying, wow, there is something going on here with this astrology. And again, I have to emphasize here again at the bottom, when you are doing these calculations, if you add 1 year to what is being discussed, you subtract 4 minutes. It seems almost counterintuitive, but that's how it works. And then if you subtract 1 year in these calculations, then we add 4 minutes. Now, Venus or Mars or Jupiter will show up in many different ways depending upon one's age. And so when you're asking questions, as well as if you're making an interpretation, recognize, for instance, this example of Venus. And Venus will show up in a child's chart or a prepubescent person as a girlfriend, a playmate, playtime, music lessons, art. And now this again gives you some dynamics to when you ask them, oh, here's Venus, and you were 10 years old, or approximately 10, because we don't know exactly if it was 10 at this point. Okay, so did you get into art, music? Oh, yes, yes, fashion and so forth. Then we're getting a little bit closer. That same Venus and the same aspect, when it shows up in your teens, late teens, typically 20s and the adult, same Venus, you're going to be asking different questions. Okay, feminine love or romance, and classically a female, could be a girlfriend, buddy, a companion. Arts and music, friends sharing, poetry and lyrics, social comparing. You can see it has more of a mature expression of Venus. Now, I also noted here that it's kind of a secondary aspect for pregnancy. Venus and becoming pregnant, yeah, that can happen. That can be one of these aspects. More likely, however, would be maybe Ceres, the asteroid, uh, who is definitely a mother energy, and of course the moon. But then it could be maybe the ruler of the fifth house. Okay, so there's various ways of looking at that. That same Venus, same aspect when you're like in your 40s, 50s, and older than that. Oh, it's a younger female. Oh, maybe a relative. Art, music, hobbies, beauty, products, aesthetics, and objects to cherish. Interior decorating, all of that. And then bottom note here, all planets can appear as people, phases, interests, challenges, environments, and inspirations or lessons. Just to be more flexible with all the different ways that they can show up. And that's not only with Venus, but with all of the planets. Let's move on to another example. Here is a fellow. He gave me this time of 1 p.m. We calculate it, and he is an Aquarius, the very, very beginning of Aquarius. And that shows up here, this sun here in Aquarius in the ninth house with this calculation. And I'm not sure if it's the sun's in that house. It probably is, because there are 11 degrees between the sun and the midheaven. So you can do quite a few different minutes, and it'll still be in the ninth house. But this ascendant, it's only 2 degrees, Gemini. Wow, just a couple of minutes before. And this guy has got a Taurus rising. So these are some of the things we go, oh, okay, well, that could change things. So that's why when you're being given like someone's date and you start interpreting it really quickly, may not be a Gemini rising, could be Taurus. Um, I found out very quickly and just wanted to point this out. His father was psychic and who enjoyed readings. And he said that both parents were particular. Okay, well, how about that? So here we have oftentimes in a man's chart, I look at the midheaven, and that is the personality of the same-sex parent. And so that's up here in Aquarius, what's happening with the planet Uranus. Now here's Uranus here in the third. Oh, getting psychic information in a water sign Cancer, and the father really enjoyed readings, and he was psychic himself. And not only that, but here is Uranus conjunct the South Node, and maybe the father's influence, which of course this is his chart. This is the sun's chart. This is my client's chart. So he too probably is very intuitive, having gained something like that from his father. That Uranus then makes a square over here to Neptune in Libra. Again, that antenna is up, very intuitive, very interesting. Meanwhile, this fellow is a creative dynamo, and he was a talker, which is going to make me think, oh, maybe that uh, Gemini rising is correct, but I'm not going to totally stay right there. Inventor, and I'm going to call him a lusty dreamer. He had a strong sex drive, and that could show up here with this moon Pluto in Leo. Yeah, it could show up in several other ways too. But as far as our rectification goes, let's again take a look at those aspects or possible aspects to those angular houses. Up here, looking at the tick-tock here, 11 degrees. Aquarius is where we get started. And then there's going to be a time when we are going to have an opposition to the moon there in the fourth house. And then 4 years later, see, maybe 5 years later. Yeah, 5 years later, a opposition to Pluto. Those are going to be significant. An opposition to the moon, opposition to Pluto. Meanwhile, here is this ascendant moving ever more closer to Jupiter, and that a conjunction with Jupiter, that too will probably be significant. That is where I will start in talking with him. After I've got those calculations, I can point towards, other events too, but this give us this idea. Okay, conjunction Jupiter, opposition Moon, Pluto. When did that happen? This is a chart of the same fellow done by hand, and I just wanted to point out a couple of different things, paying attention to the natal retrogrades, and noticing that the Mercury here was retrograde at 31. And you don't have to calculate that always, but what did he start to rethink about? Maybe a maturing process at age 31 when Mercury was retrograde. And then, are there larger patterns like a T square up here with Venus, Uranus, Neptune? Okay, we already identified that psychic father, but a T square, that'll be interesting, just food for thought. We do the calculations based on the information that he gave me, 1 p.m. And remember, we were looking at when that progressed ascendant conjuncted Jupiter. When did that happen? Here is we have those calculations. Oh, here's where we have the midheaven opposing moon here. That happened at 8, according to this calculation. And again, 5 years later, here we have the Pluto and Jupiter right next to each other. But the opposition to Pluto, that happened at 13, age 13. Moon at 8, Pluto at 13, next year, conjunction with Jupiter at 14. Just to give us something to go by. Here's what he told me. Here I had, that opposition to the moon here at 6, and he was very close to his grandfather. The whole family went camping. What a great thing to do with the moon in Leo in the 4th house, age 6. Okay, and then here was that Jupiter. Here's the ascendant here conjunct Jupiter. That should be important. And he got into sports and a great trip to Chicago. And what was his highlight of going to Chicago? He went to Hugh Hefner's mansion. Okay, and so remember he's going to turn into a lusty fellow, and he started young, quite young here. But that happened here at age 11. And what else have we got going on here? Here at 14, a sextile to the moon, and he moved. Again, no big surprises when there's a strong aspect to the moon that there is a move, sextile, probably a good move, and he got laid by a neighbor, an older woman who owned a car, exclamation point. A 14-year-old. I mean, nowadays in our, our what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I mean, she would have been in trouble, right? On his side, he was jubilant, and what a deal! Someone who owned a car, 7th heaven. He was very happy about it, and it's a sextile to the moon. Okay, just a couple of different things. And we see that happened at 14 and a half. That did not match the calculations, but let me see if it matches the new calculations, that moon. Here, here's that moon, sextile, looking over here, age 14. Yep, that's when it happened, age 14. And then that Pluto, here's the Pluto thing, that in this recalculated chart that happened at 10. And I've now added 10 minutes. Yeah, there we go. There's that opposition to Pluto. He took a trip down to Florida, and he was very willful and sly. Well, he's a willful and sly person anyway. But now this time is correct. I added 10 minutes, and now all of these aspects should fit the whole bits of information that he gave. The nice thing, of course, of having a recording of this is that you can take your time going over all of these different incidents. So he grew up to be an electrical contractor, and that could show up here with that Uranus being emphasized here Now it's found in the second house of more things like objects, classical electronic objects that you can hold in your hand. And that's what, electrical contractors do when they wire someone's home. Up here, Mercury, Sun in a sign of Aquarius, more design and technological inclined. And then he burnt his arm rather severely at one point. We can take a look at that in just a second. But here is Mars at 18 Scorpio. And when you're thinking of burnt, sixth house of accidents of hurt and things like that, here it's in a fixed sign, and that is squaring the moon over here. When did that happen when he burnt his arm? We see he got his tonsils out when the MC squared Mars. So that fits into the sixth house also. Here we go. Here he burnt his arm, and there was he had an appendix issue, and there was an explosive that he got too close to, burnt his arm, and that was the ascendant quincunxing Mars at age 13. It all shows up here. Here it is, quincunx Mars in the sixth house, 13. Okay, it's working. This chart is happening. Some bonus material from a few more years later. Uh, Here, at age 33, he had a trine to Mars, and his electrical contractor business was cooking. He had an employee, he was expanding, he was working a lot with his hands, very Mars. And it's a trine. It was a good, successful business. He got so busy, however, that it started like to really amp up. And I now see that he had a rocky relationship here at 34. Jealousy showed up. That's when I'm using some other aspects, not the progression here. This is just for me because we've already established his rectified chart. Now, this is just, bonus material of also what's happening and what does that look like astrologically. So relationship issues here. The progressed sun was squaring the ascendant. Yeah, that's difficult. Which of course is the seventh house. Here was however, the progressed ascendant making a trine to Saturn. Again, the business doing really well, but he had to deal with bureaucracy, taxes, hardworking, the employees, equipment, and things like that. Very Saturnian, doesn't it sound like that? But then when the midheaven made a trine to the planet Uranus, he got also into psychic things like his father did, like his family traditions, as well as Uranian groups, clubs, associations, socializing in psychic-oriented spiritual groups at that point. Now, that is what he told me up here, and here we have again the aspects. Here we have that trine to Saturn, again, age 35, perfect. Here was getting into the spiritual groups here, age 35, there it is. So basically, the chart is rectified and is continuing to work in these other incidents later on. So here we have now another option and another client. And notice now the progression years of planets. I had mentioned that before. Here is Mercury went direct at age 21. That's going to be important. Also, the Sun, Saturn direct at age 4. That does not show up in these calculations that we're using, but it was just something that I did, and it usually shows up important. What is useful to pay attention to are the T-squares, grand trines, great crosses, and because those planets are going to be extra strong. In my work over here on again the left-hand side, I've used those aspects and I pointed towards them at the beginning of this presentation. And I stopped using quintiles and biquintiles. I just dropped them. They weren't really showing up stuff. But paying attention to the which planets are stronger with how many aspects. The sun has 7 aspects here. Then I pay attention to that. And I'll be talking about that when I'm going to be making my presentation at UAC 2026 next year. And I'll be talking about Edgar Casey and astrology, a totally different slant on astrology. Okay, here's the second female. And she gave me her time here of that 7 p.m. And she works in recreational therapy. Okay, very good. I'll be looking for that too. But I have to be very careful again to not jump into, oh, this is the chart. Oh, I can see the recreational therapy in it. No, I have to make sure that the chart is correct because here we have this ascendant here at 28 degrees Aquarius. And just a couple minutes later, and it's going to go into the next sign. So, yeah, I'm going to wait. In the meantime, she loves and admires her parents. Isn't that great? Um, and her mother is crafty, and her father is an internist MD. Again, I take a look at the parental axis up here, and the Sagittarius would point towards her crafty mother. And there's Jupiter in Libra. Isn't that perfect? And then down here, Father Mercury ruled here in Gemini. Mercury's over here between Sun in another sign in Leo, but in Virgo of the health industries, right next to Pluto, and he is an MD internist, really, getting out the magnifying glass in his profession. She told me also that her younger brother um, eventually became bipolar. And so, okay, I'm going to be paying attention later that the third house of siblings, here is Mars, probably her brother, and he becomes bipolar. What's going on there? Oh, look at this. We have got a square to the planet Uranus in the sixth house of health square. Okay. I'm not going to work with that quite yet, but it's interesting information. What was interesting here is at 13 months, she bit an electrical cord and she really burnt her lower lip to the point that she had to have plastic surgery at 12. We'll be paying attention to some stuff like that. So again, like with all of these, I'm looking at this midheaven up here, and pretty soon it's going to be making a conjunction with Saturn. What's going to happen with that? And then we'll pay attention to again, the progressed ascendant, what happens there. I make my calculations, and then we look at some of these different things. Here we have, for instance, this ascendant making an opposition to Mercury, and then very quickly an opposition to Pluto because they are side by side. Remember, that was an indicator of her father. And wow, that shows up here at age 2. I wonder if that's right because she had that that damage to her lip, and it is in Virgo with this. So maybe that is it. But she says it was before age 2. But anyway, that gives us, something to go on. Here we have that midheaven conjuncting Saturn. Yeah, that showed up there in the 10th house. That shows up here at age 8. What is the truth? Okay. Lots of different information. Here, I found that midheaven, remember, conjuncting Saturn, and that showed up at age 8 in the calculations. No, no, that did not happen at age 8. It happened at age 5. She had walking pneumonia and she was held back 1 year in school. Here she pointed up here at let's find a couple of other aspects because that's off 3 years. Okay, here is a midheaven making a sextile to Jupiter. And that was the first year of her nature camp. She loved it. She loved the nature camp so much that she did it for the next 9 years. So she would really got into that. This was also about the same time that she got her plastic surgery for her chin. And this Jupiter is in the eighth house of surgery. Okay. But that showed up at 13, maybe 13 and a half. Okay, and we just continue to do all these other aspects on, but let's just take a look at that. 13 and a half. And this is after I have looked at the chart that, remember, it was 3 years off, and so that wasn't working. So I made the a change in the calculation. And again, here is that wonderful sextile to Jupiter that was so great for her, that she went to the camp and then she continued it for years afterwards. What a nice sextile to Jupiter. And indeed, that shows up at 13 and a half. And then this was the same time that she got her plastic surgery at a very young age. And that shows up not only with the Jupiter here in the eighth house, but then the Uranus there. But let's take a look at a couple other things. Look at this. This is something very interesting in anybody's chart. When your progressed ascendant and midheaven move into a different sign the same day. Okay, this is very exact, and that can only happen when they're cardinal signs. And so this is it shows up here. The ascendant went into Aries, and then the midheaven went into Capricorn. And yes, it shows up, just at the very same day. Okay. Obviously, as things change, that's not going to happen in life very same day, but it's probably going to be that year or that month, or here is April, springtime. And that happened when they both went into different signs at age 16, 16.6, between 16 and 17, when that major shift happens. And tell you what, midheaven about your environment, when you're a little bit older than 16, it could be a new job, but major things. And then of course with your ascendant changing, you change, your personality change, maybe you change your clothing. All kinds of really cool things happen. I'm going to go back just to pay attention to that. At age 16, 16 and a half. Okay. And then here we have it. Here is 16 and a half. Midheaven goes into Capricorn. Ascendant goes into Ascendant. Major stuff is happening. Her brother went to prep school, so he was out of the house. Her sister was also gone, older sister who had left the house. So now she's a lone child. That changes things in the midheaven in her home thing. And then she was pretty much alone a lot of the times. And then she got into being more assertive. The ascendant goes into Aries. She got more assertive, and she got more parental attention, midheaven in Capricorn, because now she was the only kid in the house. You see how things totally changed for her when they both went into those cardinal signs. And so this is now her, true and accurate chart. I set it for 7:15 rectified time. And now she has a Pisces rising. Remember all those planets that were in the seventh house? Sun, Mercury, Pluto? No, they are actually in the sixth house. And what a big difference. 15 minutes later, and it is a different chart. So just another emphasis that, yeah, rectifying is very important things. Now she's got a really packed sixth house. And remember that she was into recreational therapy. I mean, isn't that perfect? Especially when you've got Mercury, Sun, and Uranus and Venus in the sixth house. And remember the brother Mars. Now we know it specifically true. We could only guess, but we can just say for certain. Yes, her brother Mars in the third house, making that square here to the planet Uranus, and he again became a bipolar person. I emphasize here also Gemini in the fourth house. And just as a really interesting thing, oftentimes with Gemini in the fourth house, there is a split, there is a duality there. And sometimes the parents could divorce and you've got, you go back and forth between two different homes, or the personalities of the parents are so different that when mom's at home, there's a certain set of rules. Then dad comes home after work. This is like the classic system. Um, and then with his different personality, then the rules of the house change. And so within one home, there are two sets of rules of how to behave, if you should be doing your homework or not. And I just, noticed that many times with Gemini on the fourth. Okay, we did three charts and three progressions right now. Any questions?
We don't have any question so far, so
Okay,
we will keep going.
okay, I'll keep going then. We have one more to do, and here is the males chart, and we've got a double Scorpio, and we've got this time of 6:30 a.m. And again, we've got the system down pretty well now. I am again looking at as this progressed ascendant moves, it's going to be making a conjunction to the sun. Then it's going to leave the sign of Scorpio as it progresses, and then it will go and make a conjunction with Mars. I'll be asking those questions quite quickly because it's so obvious. Meanwhile, up here, the midheaven, here's at 27, almost 28 degrees. So in about 2 years, it's going to be leaving Leo, going into Virgo, and just about immediately as it goes into Virgo, Uranus is 0 degrees, 23 minutes. And so, yeah, the midheaven goes into a new sign and Uranus is activated. Okay. Yeah. What does that look like? That will continue to go, and then we have a conjunction with Pluto in Virgo in the 10th. There's other aspects going on too, but these are just some quick eyeballs of, I'll be asking questions about that, probably starting with okay, so Uranus and that move into Virgo. Was there a move? And it happened quite young. Sometimes when they're really young, they may not remember it, or maybe it was like part of the family lore. They were told about it later. Let's take a look at these. Here we have those calculations based on that 6:30 time. And here we have then the um, very quickly, again, age two, just as I eyeballed it, age two is when the midheaven goes into Virgo and makes that Uranus. And if it were, let's say, age like 6, 7, 8, 9, then I'd say, oh, did you join the Cub Scouts? Because your Uranus is very much into groups and group dynamics. How about interested in young, like a science project or other Uranian sorts of things? Those would be the questions I would have. Here is a square to Mars here at age 4, 4.5. Oh, okay, Mars, sports. But did you get hurt? It's a square. Here we have down there, I had pointed towards the ascendant, making that conjunction to the sun. And that shows up here at 11. Okay, oh, the sun at 11. And then the midheaven making a conjunction to Pluto also at 11. Wow, two different things, quite different. The midheaven on intense Pluto, but then kind of a positive reprieve as the ascendant shines upon your sun. Wow, what happened at age 11? Let's find out. Okay, this is the calculations that I was just verbally talking about. Here's the ascendant on conjuncting Sun. Here's 11. Here was the midheaven conjuncting Pluto at 11. And he says, oh my goodness, I tell you what happened. My stepmother She was a wicked woman. She was a bitch, and she would have hysterical tantrums. There is the midheaven sort of thing, and you can't get away from that. But for him personally, he was doing well. He was happy. He was keeping away from the home, and he was now in band. It's the sun. He's in band. But it did not happen at 11. It happened at 13. Okay. So we are now 2 years off. Yeah. And I go, okay, 2 years off. If it happened at 13, then I'm adding 2 years or adding 8 minutes, which means I have to subtract 8 minutes from the 6:30 time. And it ended up that I had to subtract 7 minutes. And so here we have that time. Now, yes, here it is, 13. Here is the sun and then Pluto, age 13. And they both happened at the same time in his life. And he personally was doing great, sun in the first house, but there was some terrible pressure happening from this difficult mother up there. Um, I jumped down here because this is also something quite significant. Here is the ascendant making a conjunction to his Mars, and that happened at age 23. And I've got very early 1985. Just prior to that, a very positive Jupiter, sextiling Jupiter, 84, age 22. And that is going to be interesting. Right close to it then is the midheaven making an opposition to the moon. And that shows up also age 23. So I'm thinking that age 22, 23 must be pretty important. And there's a bit of a Marsy thing going on here with the ascendant, but then that opposition to the moon that could sometimes be, emotional changes, probably a move, definitely a move. What happened? Well, let me go back to the actual events here. What happened here was here 1984. He's got this. Here's the sextile to Jupiter. Here is the opposition to the moon, and he was in the Jupiter time. He was going to college, but then he kind of jumped the boat, as it were. He joined the Navy. That's very Marsy. And then, of course, you would have to move. And he stayed only 1 year because emotionally he couldn't handle it. He said this was a great big mistake, opposition moon, but Mars was involved and he joined the Navy. And that then brings us to some other things connected to the moon and in Pisces here in the fourth house when that opposition, and he joined the Navy, Pisces, moon Pisces, but he hated. He got out early, so he said that was a big mistake. But the moon dynamics, as well as the this polarity right here with the mother influences. Here is the south node. It's although it's in the third house, it is certainly a conjunction there uh, with the Aquarius midheaven, excuse me, nadir. And his mother, initial, remember he had a stepmother. His mother was an elementary school teacher, and she had a drug problem. So whereas we've got Uranus up here in Virgo, pointing towards the personality of the mother, and she's helping. She's elementary school teacher helping the young ones. But then she had a drug problem. We've got the moon over here in Pisces, and uh, and then even this Uranus is squaring Mars. And then, of course, after his mother left, he's with his father, and his father gets the stepmother, and she is the bitch. So again, we've got some difficult aspects here with the fourth house, with the mother, and so forth. The father, interestingly enough, he was a crime reporter, investigative journalist. Here is the son as his personality, and we see the Leo sun alignment, and the father is a Scorpio in the first house. What a great place for a crime reporter, an investigative journalist. And there we have it. We have just did it. And that's the big picture. Rectification, fine tuning. I gave you a lot of information, but again, luckily, and 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 as far as the divine communication goes, all of that information is there. So you can take a look at this later and go over all those really interesting aspects and those verified people's lives and really learn a lot of things connected to aspects and planets. And I've got some PDF flyers that are handouts that are accompanying this presentation. Just to tell you that another hat that I wear, I'm a spiritual hypnotherapist, and these are my books on reincarnation, inner journeys, cosmic sojourns, and you can find them on many a book shelf, and you can order them. And here I am writing now another book on utopia, and that will show up with my Jupiter conjunct Uranus in the 10th house. And there you have it.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a question from Alicia. She's asking, will this approach with no birth time?
With no time?
Birth time.
When you get the time close enough, the closer that you get, the more that this is going to be accurate. And remember, that's one of the reasons why I was pointing towards, oh, what about the personalities of the parents? How would that show up? That helps you to kind of like get a clue about the midheaven and the nadir. And then also, what kind of career do you get into or relationships? Your own persona or personality, your ascendant and the descendant. And that will help you when you really have no idea of what's going on. Good. So I see that Susan liked this and she's going to be working with it. Thanks. Okay, good. Thank you for the various informations. Now I'm looking at the chat stuff.
Okay, great. I have another question here from Virginia. Will this work with the whole sign houses?
It will not.
Someone is suggesting, Rosella, um, amazing class. Please come back for a 5-week class.
Yoo-hoo.
Yoo-hoo! Sure, why
Good.
not?
Good.
We
Good.
always
Yes, my pleasure. Again, lots of information, but I've given you all some handouts, and we've got all of these really interesting aspects, when they happened, what kind of aspects, and what actual event happened in these various people's lives. And so you can learn so much from that, as well as all of the individual rectifications that you all will be doing, not only with your own chart, but with charts of other people that you know. And again, just a great way to learn about the meanings and the various ways that planets can show up in our lives, as well as those aspects.
Susan is asking, does it help to have the book of tables?
No, no. I just used the Book of Tables just to tell you where I got the information, how I came up with it myself, because I was working, doing my own hand calculated charts myself. But all of that is done with the modern programs.
Okay, I think that was the last question. Many good comments. Stephen, thank you so much. It was a great class, and I was happy to join and host you today. And
Thank
I'm sure
you.
I'm going to see you teaching again at Synchronicity University.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aida. And good luck with everybody with your astrology. It's a great thing to study, and you'll always be a student.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Okay.
See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.